All right, this is part 2 of Absolutism in France, and we're going to be looking only at Louis XIV, the Sun King. Pretty, right? All right, we're going to start with Louis and his childhood. When his dad dies, Louis XIII, Cardinal Richelieu is the one who was in charge with Louis XIII. And Richelieu was running the country with the help of Louis's mom. And when Louis XIII dies and Cardinal Richelieu dies, then Louis XIII's wife, Anne of Austria, appoints another cardinal, Cardinal Mazarin, to run the kingdom on her behalf, even though she is legally the regent of Louis XIV, which specifically goes against Louis XIII's will. He specifically said, I do not want Anne in charge. And she actually gains the support of many nobles to overturn the king's will, so she is in charge. Cardinal Mazarin runs the kingdom and continues on the same path that Cardinal Richelieu did, centralizing the power, diminishing the power of the nobles, making the monarch the central power of the kingdom, creating this absolutism that he is literally going to hand to Louis XIV. However, the nobles who are having their power taken away from them, having economic privileges taken away from them, they hate Mazarin. And the fact that he seems to have so much power over Anne, Queen Anne, makes a lot of people very suspicious of him. And this leads to several rebellions, and they're sort of collectively known as the Fronde. These all take place during Louis's childhood, and several times, fearing for her life and the life of her son Louis and his brother Philippe, Queen Anne of Austria grabs the boys and runs out of Paris, worried that there's going to be a riot and they're going to be executed. So he grows up kind of almost in this state of fear that the people and his nobles are out to get him. And in fact, when he's about 13, Mazarin helps him assemble an army to take back his capital, which had been under the control of some nobles, including his own cousin. And as he approaches the gates of Paris, his cousin starts firing cannon at him, and he will never forget this. Most of his childhood, his brother and his mom and himself were sort of under a state of house arrest. So this leads to a deep distrust in his nobles and the common people, especially the common people in his capital of Paris. This is a picture of Cardinal Mazarin, and this is a picture of Louis XIV, the boy king. This is a painting of one of the battles of the Fronde, and you can tell it is taking place right in the city of Paris. Maybe you can't tell, but how can you tell? If you look in the background there, you see this big fortress. That is a fortress known as the Bastille. And we're going to talk about that when we get to the French Revolution. It is a major fortress within the city. It is where the arms and the gunpowder is stored and will become a symbol of French royal authority. And it will get its day in the revolution. Louis finally does take control in 1661, and he's 23 years old. And he continues this policy of centralization, but adds to it this fear and this distrust of his own nobility, and creates this system to tax the nobles and to weaken them as much as possible. Those government agents that go around taxing are called intendants. He is literally the embodiment of the ideal absolute monarch, ideal from the monarch's point of view, that is. This is reflected in his statement, L'État, c'est moi, which is, I am the state. He believed he was France. He was the government. He was the only ruler. There was only one thing above him, and that was God. Louis tries to secure the economy of the country by appointing a finance minister. In the beginning, he appoints a pretty smart guy, not that Colbert. This Colbert, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. But in the same time that he does this, he also really cracks down on those policies of religious toleration that his grandfather, Henry IV, had put in. He cancels the Edict of Nantes. After all, the king was Catholic, so everyone else should be as well. And Huguenots are persecuted or are encouraged to go ahead and leave France. So what was life like if you were Louis XIV? Well, let's just take a look at his house. That's an aerial view. That's his front yard. This is just a cross-section of the house. It's rare to find pictures of the house in total. It is so massive. It was so amazing. Here is one of his pools in the back. He has many fountains, tourists. This is a hallway. Okay, now albeit an amazing hallway. It's called the Hall of Mirrors, but still, it's a hallway. All right, what was his life like? The ultimate in luxury, but it was also the ultimate in spectacle. Everything was on display. And why did he need a house that was so massive that you can really only take a picture of it by air? Because he required his nobility to live there. So for certain months out of the year, every major noble family was required to move in and live with him. And your job as the nobility was to kind of cater to his every need. Every moment of his life he viewed as a chance to showcase his power, his grandeur, his wealth. There were ceremonies for everything. There was a special ceremony for the waking of the king, for the going to bed of the king. When the king sat down to eat, people came to just watch like it was a show. Everything he did was on display. He even had certain nobility who, when he was showing his favor of this noble versus that noble, he might allow one of those nobles to hold the bucket so he could pee. Again, this is what he used Versailles for. And creating these stupid high school-like cliquish games where he shows his favor to one person one day and that person suddenly goes up in status and everybody wants to hang out with that person, makes this infighting and the nobility and everybody's trying to be recognized. Maybe Louis will look at them today. Maybe Louis will say, that's a nice coat. If Louis says that's a nice coat, then you can be sure that everyone else will be wearing the exact same coat tomorrow. He turns them into squabbling high school students, desperate to be popular, which turns their attention away from their estates, their former power, their former rights, and focuses them all on him. This is a picture I took when I was there of his backyard. You can see he had forests and a lake far into the background there. And then off to the sides, he had formal gardens. There was even a semi-miniature village, an idealized peasant village, where his granddaughter, Marie Antoinette, would go to hang out and play. It is literally one of the biggest places you'll ever go, and to believe that it was all created for and by one person is ridiculous. And there go pictures you can't see. I already put them in. All right. Here's a great one. Louis is a big patron of the arts as well. His grandmother, great-grandmother, Catherine de' Medici. When she comes over from Italy, she brings this new art form, ballet. And the French really, really manipulate ballet. And Louis thinks that he is a fabulous dancer. And if you've ever looked at any of the pictures of him, he always has one leg sticking out. That's his way of showing you what he considers his best asset, which is his awesome dancing legs. In fact, he had dance masters come to Versailles and create dances specifically for him that were all about him, and required that all of his nobles there learn them. And they would put on shows, because you have to entertain yourself somehow when you have no actual job. So Versailles becomes the center of art and music and poetry during the reign of Louis XIV, because, that's where the king was, that's where the money was. But you were only going to get that money and that attention from the king if what you made glorified Louis. This is a costume from a ballet dedicated to Louis, as you can tell, because it's all, the sun, and he viewed himself as the Sun King. He was as important to his people as the sun. And this is actually him in his costume, because, of course, the ballet was written for him, about him, and who better to play him than him? Now, Louis doesn't make always the best decisions. He fights some pretty terrible wars. He tries to expand France. And he fights those wars in the 1660s and the 1670s. He goes after the Netherlands. And remember, at this point, part of the Netherlands are independent and part of them still belong to Spain. So he's not making any friends in Spain. However, Spain has their own problems, and you'll see on the next slide. In the 1680s, many countries who are very concerned about how strong and powerful France is getting unite against him in something called the League of Augsburg. And William of Orange, who goes on to become William, King of England, with his wife William and Mary, unite as well. So there's some pretty major countries on board in this sort of I Hate France League. And then, by fate, France is weakened by some poor harvests. These wars are not cheap, and the taxes that he is charging to pay for his palace, to pay for his lifestyle, to pay for his wars, are making people very angry. One of the biggest wars that goes on during Louis's reign is the War of the Spanish Succession, and it begins in 1701, and it happens when King Charles II of Spain dies with no heir. Yeah, Habsburg, right? He has been married twice, but let's just say this is an exceptionally flattering photo of him. To read accounts of him, his jaw was so pronounced he could not chew his own food. And so if the food was not mashed up, someone had to chew it for him. He would drool. His tongue was oversized. He had a hunchback. One leg was shorter than the other. I mean, this is what happens when you have incredible amounts of inbreeding. His mother was married to her uncle. So his dad was his, what is that, great uncle? Ew. It's all icky. He was just a big old mess of every inbred disease you can have. He was probably unable to father children, even though he married twice. Those poor women. He never had a child. And when he realizes he's going to die, he agrees to leave the throne to his great nephew to keep it again in the family. Unfortunately, if you go back down the line, his line married into the French royal family. So his great nephew is actually Louis XIV's grandson. Remember that League of Augsburg was all put together to keep the power of France contained. Can you imagine how much they must have freaked out when you have France and Spain combined? Because when Louis XIV would die, then theoretically his son would take over. When his son would die, then his grandson would suddenly be the king of Spain and France. That's a pretty mighty empire, and that would destroy any balance of power within Europe. So everyone in that league gets on board to prevent the union of the Spanish and French thrones. In 1714, they finally end this war. France and Spain have sort of successfully been chastised. They lose some of their possessions. The balance of power is preserved, and the thrones are not combined. When Louis dies, he actually, sadly, he outlives all of his children and some of his grandchildren, and is left with his great grandchild to be on the throne. And so in the end of his life, his family is sort of just dropping like flies around him, just dying, and he's pretty miserable. While he's personally kind of miserable, he has made France a major military and cultural power in Europe. This time period is the time period of France. Anything that was important was going on in France. However, his wars, his lifestyle, and his massive crazy house leave France with debts that are sky high. His successor is never going to be able to maintain that kind of control over the nobility, and the nobility are going to start to get out of control. And then his successor is going to fight a war that's going to make him even more unpopular, make the country even more in debt. Finally, the people will have had enough. But that's for chapter 7. Tomorrow, it is, ding, 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 Maria Theresa versus Frederick the Great. We're going to have a war in Central Europe. I'll see you there.